How can I possibly characterize my life? I would characterize my life as a long and arduous spiritual journey to obtain the greatest prize, the greatest treasure. And what was that treasure? The treasure was not, that great prize was not gold, it was not silver, it was not exquisite jewels, it was essentially finding the grace of God. And this was a long and difficult journey that took me most of my adult years. That journey was dramatically interrupted on the road to Erfurt in 1505 in the month of July by a thunderstorm. And much like the Apostle Paul, whose life was interrupted on the road to Damascus, my life as a young law student was interrupted by thunderstorms, by violent lightning. And I was so very frightened that I lay on the ground prostrate, afraid of being harmed. And I realized in that moment that I was being touched by God. It was as if God were interrupting my life and was sending a very special message to Martin Luther. My plans for law were over. Much to the disappointment, the extreme disappointment of my dear, dear father, who wanted so much for his son to become a lawyer. It took years. It took many, many years for my father to come to an agreement about the wisdom of my choice as an Augustinian monk. And so I began that life, that radically different life, that very ascetic life, a life of constant penance, of constant searching of one's soul, of taking account of one's sin. And to be very honest, it was very difficult to sin, for our lives were under constant supervision by our superiors. So there was very little opportunity or leisure to think about many sins. But I lived this very ascetic life, in penitence, in taking account of the sins. This was a daily exercise that occurred many times a day. And I found myself trying to obtain a feeling of a right relationship to God. How could I ever do this? Because as I began to enumerate my sins, there would be this voice that would say, "Martin, you forgot this sin. Oh, Martin, you forgot this sin. And Martin, you did not do this confession correctly. You did not do it correctly." So I was hounded and haunted constantly with the meticulousness of penance, of being conscious constantly of my ever-present sinful self. And I could never seem to arrive, even after years of this very ascetic life, I could never arrive at a place where I could make my conscience be quiet without it accusing me and saying, "Martin, you are still, with all of your penance and with all of your contrition and all of your confession, you are still a sinner before God." And I must confess to you that I found myself almost hating God. It sounds blasphemous, but I found a real disgust with the concept of the righteousness of God. I hated that term, the righteousness of God. And I thought to myself, it is not enough that you have the 10 Commandments in order to condemn us for our sinful ways. But now you have the gospel, which also sounds as if we will receive the wrath of the judgment of God for our sinfulness. For the Bible makes that very clear, that we are nothing. No one is righteous, no, not one. And so because of this uncomfortable place that I found myself, I began to experience a condition that I can only call Anfechtung. And Anfechtung is a condition of complete emptiness. It is worse than despair. It is worse than hopelessness. It is emptiness of spirit and of soul. It is melancholy at its worst. And it was sometime around 15, 17 that I began to do serious study of the Apostle Paul's epistle in Romans. And I came across that first chapter in the 17th verse of the epistle of Romans in my preparation to teach that epistle to students. And I came to that beautiful phrase, the just shall live by faith. The just shall live by faith. And what the Apostle Paul was reiterating, the prophet Habakkuk of the 2nd chapter, who said, the just shall live by faith. And it was as if paradise and the heavens themselves were open to me and flooded upon me this great and bountiful riches, blessing. That for which I most sought was this peace with God. That which I had worked for years, came upon me in one instant, and it was as if I were truly born again.